Are you one of those incredibly fortunate people who have stock options or stock shares of stock as part of your compensation? You can tell this isn't specifically my area, but if you are that fortunate, we have a guest on today who can help you to strategize how to manage that so that you can maximize it and optimize it for financial wealth. Your relationship with money matters. I'm Michelle Perkins, and this is the Money and You podcast, where I will be breaking down your relationship with money, offering tough love money tips, and a money dating plan that will focus on lifting the barriers to success to help pave the way for better money practices and increased wealth. It's time to take control to live a limit-free life. It starts today. Hello, and welcome to the Money and You Show. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host, and I have a fabulous guest for you today. Very excited. This is an area I don't know much about, so I am going to be listening and learning right along with you. But this is a really important topic, and I've never had anyone talk about it on the show before. So I'm very excited. If it's not necessarily relevant to you immediately, it's a good thing for you to know about anyway. And I'm going to just give you a little background on our guest today. From a young age, Joe Forish, CFA, CFP, learned about maximizing hard work and doing what you do best while working at his father's auto shop. He also saw firsthand both the rewards and challenges of running a business. Professionally, Joe honed his financial expertise investing in public and private equity, completing the Harvard Business Analytics program with distinction. Has taken his BS from Penn State University to a whole new level. He started Fortrove Partners to help tech founders and tech employees with stock ownership relieve stress, uncertainty, and time spent around finances. Stock compensation can be extremely complicated, and you don't have time to figure it out. He works with people who have stock compensation and may not know all the ins and outs about it. Joe collaborates with clients to build confidence, to maximize tax obligations, and build the lifestyle that you want. He will help you with not throwing money away, reducing your anxiety about money, selling options and RSUs at the wrong time, and plenty more. His areas of expertise are financial plans for client-specific goals, investment management and portfolio management, and custom financial coaching. Joe, welcome.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
You're such a welcome guest. I'm so glad that you are with us today. This is a real new area for me, and I'm sure really for listeners. And I'd love that you're addressing this because when you said something in the bio about people probably not understanding it, I mean, I just had another guest, we were talking about health insurance. People barely understand their health insurance that they receive. And certainly this is a more complex area. So you want to just share a little background on you? I read your bio, but we always like to hear from our guests.
Yes, I studied finance in undergrad and then embarked upon a finance career, investment banking, private equity, hedge funds, and then I went back to school. I did a analytics program at Harvard Business School, and it was very eye-opening for me because I got to really understand a lot more around the strategy around businesses and not so much the numbers on the finance end. And when I finished that, I decided to launch Fortrove Partners, where I help people with financial planning around their stock compensation. And the number one reason why I started it was that through my career in finance, so many people would ask me questions. I have this stock, what should I do with it? Or I have this situation, what should I do? So I really came to the realization that people need help, and I put myself in a position where I could really help people make a big difference in their lives.
Yeah, thank you. It is a great niche to be part of because it's. Do you find many people out there helping people with this?
There are some, yes. There are some people who focus on this niche.
Okay. So tell me, just some of the basics of what people might need to know that they may not know.
Mm-hmm. Commonly, if you work for one of the larger publicly traded companies, mostly in tech, people get compensated with things called RSUs, restricted stock units. And it is a form of compensation. Instead of being paid cash, you actually get paid shares of stock in the business. And it gets a little complicated because just like when you receive a salary, you have to pay tax on the cash you earn. You also need to pay tax on the RSUs that are granted to you. And then it gets a little bit tricky because then say you own 100 shares in employer ABC. Along the way, the stock price will either go up or down. And depending on when you do sell the shares, there could be additional tax implications. And a lot of people get hung up on that because they feel that, oh, well, I paid the tax already when I received the RSU. Why do we need to pay tax again on these items?
Right.
So that is one area where people get really hung up on the RSUs.
Yeah. And, what are some of the benefits of receiving the RSUs versus more cash? I think that's a simpler thing, obviously, for people to understand when they receive it.
Yes. One of the great benefits is that employees get to share in the upside of the business. As the company grows, it grows the revenue, it grows the profits, it grows the earnings per share, it grows the share price. Over time, employees will benefit from those gains that they're helping to contribute and help to make to the business where they're working. So there are a lot of ways to align incentives, and RSUs is a great way to do that for the employees at these companies.
Yeah, and so the companies that are offering these, who are they typically? And should you make a case for that to be part of your compensation package when you're interviewing, or is that an automatic? Do you have to ask for it?
I think it depends a lot on the companies, but typically the company will already have this in place, and it's whether it's a big tech company or pharma company. There's other companies that may have them, for example. But I think if an employer is not granting it and someone who has a job offer from this place goes and asks, they're probably not likely to implement RSUs for whether it's an employee or for a large group of employees, just because it's not part of their comp structure, their comp package. Because a lot of it goes into actually putting it into place and having a custodian help you manage the shares and doing all the taxes that I indicated before. So it can get rather convoluted, but it wouldn't hurt for an employee or someone getting an offer to ask about it if it is something that is offered by the company.
Yeah, interesting. So if it is offered by the company, it's typically offered across the board. It's not something that you would have to make a special request for example.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. So, and what sort of, restrictions or things come up around this particular aspect of your compensation?
Well, when it comes to restrictions, there's a vesting period. And that typically varies by company, but let's just say, for example purposes, that an employee gets 100 RSUs and it vests over 4 years, which means the employee gets 25 shares every year that they can do what they want with them. So in that regard, they are somewhat restricted, hence the name of the RSU, because they can't go and sell the shares right away on the market when they receive them. There is a waiting period, so to speak, which is the normal term. Instead of saying a vesting period, employees have to wait for the shares to essentially come into their possession before they can make a decision on what to do with them.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have such a naive view of this whole thing, but my sense is that you receive this as compensation and you would just keep it because you're part of the company, you're part of the growth of the company, and they kind of go together. And so, my thinking is that people don't typically sell these shares. But what is your experience, and how do you look at that?
It varies by the person. Some people don't share them. I'm sorry, they don't sell them. But some people could get into trouble when they don't do this because they could have a lot of money tied up in the stock of their employer. And that can be pretty risky, not only from the ins and outs and ups and downs of stock prices, but also from a risk management point of view. If a person has 20% of their portfolio, their net worth, in the company stock, that's a very risky position for them to go through. And as we've witnessed over the past 15 months in the markets, it's been pretty rough for a lot of people who maybe haven't sold some of their RSUs, who have maintained them this whole time. So yeah, on top of the tax complications and confusion, there is this risk around having too much money in your employer.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing, because I talk a lot about people's relationship with money. And I think when you start combining, you have this relationship with your employer and where you work, and you have this, so they sort of go together. And I could see where there's a bit of an emotional attachment to that particular stock. Yeah, I have it myself with some old Disney stock that I was part of an employee, purchase plan way back in the day. And so how do you talk to people about that?
Sometimes it can be very challenging, but a good way to think about it is that from a nerdy finance perspective, let's think about it like, okay, when you get your salary every 2 weeks or every 15 days, whenever the cadence is, that's almost like a bond. So you own a bond from the company, so you're getting paid that interest every so often, right? But then on the flip side, when you're owning the stock, you're actually taking on equity risk, which it truly is equity risk in the business. So, there are two different profiles. You have your steady salary, and then you have your ups and downs of the equity in the business. Now, granted, that exposure, that your risk tolerance that someone wants to tolerate depends on the person, how old they are, what their family situation is, et cetera, where they are in their career. But it can get tricky to try to tell someone, oh, well, your company's been returning 15% a year. Why don't you sell some and diversify the portfolio? That's a very hard conversation, but not everything goes up forever, as we've seen. And unfortunately, a lot of people have lost a lot of money over the past year or so. Yeah,
that's very interesting. And it is actually, an area where you need someone else to look at it for you because of that kind of emotional connection. Sometimes it's much harder to look at it from that business perspective. So that's a great, kind of area for you to fill. So it's good to be a objective third party, exactly, and help people get through these decisions. That was the term I was looking for. So so tell me a little more about what are some of the other kind of unique offerings that might be stock related, that might be a little different.
Yes, well, there's stock options as well, which are a lot more different and a little bit more complicated than RSUs. Stock options come in two flavors. There's qualified, and then there's incentive, and then non-qualified options. And before we get into too much of the nitty-gritty on it, essentially the qualified options, if they're held for a long enough time period, are tax favorable to the holder, whereas non-qualified options are never tax favorable. And it depends on who the person is at the company. For instance, the dollar value of qualified stock options per year is limited to $100,000. Okay. And after that, any options granted will be non-qualified. So there are tax considerations to think about regarding these two different types of options as someone is working at a company.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, the tax ramifications are probably pretty complex with these.
Yes. Tax ramifications, and also like the decision process with an RSU, you get the RSU and then you just have one decision point on it. Do you buy or do you sell? Whereas with options, there's two decision points. You have to make a decision to exercise the option. And then once you do that, you own the shares. And then after that, then you have to decide to either own them for a long time or sell them. And those two decision points could be made at the same point in time, or they could be spaced out for quite a few years. So, there are more complications just in the decision process around stock options as well.
Yeah, really interesting. And why would you make a decision not to exercise an option?
Well, if they're going to expire and they're not worth any money, then there's no sense in buying them. So, for example, if the option is to buy the shares at $10 and the shares are trading at 8, well, you would just go to the open market and buy the shares at 8. It'd be a lot simpler.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Now, do companies continue to offer additional compensation in this way? I mean, I'm thinking of this as something when you get the job, suddenly, you're given this as part of your compensation package. But is it an ongoing thing as well?
It can be. It all depends on the company and the level of where the person is working for the business.
Okay.
I would say typically that options are a little less common than RSUs, just because there's a different mechanism around them, and I feel like there's more incentive around the upside, so to speak. So, to give you an example, let's say that someone gets options where the share price is at, the share price is at 5, so the exercise price is at 5, and then they hold on to the options and the shares do really well. And let's say they're trading at $20 or $25 a share. Well, they could buy the shares at 5, sell them at 25, and make quite a substantial gain with that. So definitely more upside, but also, like anything, more risk, just given the volatility and the risk reward around those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I just was thinking about this in terms of strategy and how how do you look at this when you look at a person's overall kind of portfolio and picture? And, I'd love a couple of just case studies or stories about some of the amazing things that you might have seen with this.
Yeah, well, when it comes to looking at someone's overall portfolio, there's clearly a lot of different investment accounts. There's someone's 401k. There's an investment account. Perhaps they have an IRA, whether it's traditional or a Roth, and other bank accounts, treasury bonds, CDs, et cetera. So when looking at all of their investments, all of their money, all of their assets, all of their liabilities, and also what they want that money to do for them, like what are their goals in life as it relates to money, I really need to talk with someone and sit down with them and really understand that, not just from the qualitative point of view, but also from the quantitative perspective. So really getting a global picture of where they are is step number one. And then from there, I help them try to understand, okay, well, you own this much stock in your employer. Let's say it's 20%, which is very risky. It's very high. And I try to walk them through examples and talk with them saying, okay, well, you obviously need to have some of the shares because as RSUs vest, you're sort of not stuck, but because they get re-upped every quarter, there is that constant ownership in the company. But a smart decision is to diversify the portfolio through your ETFs, through other ways to really cut down on that risk. Where someone just has a lot of their net worth tied up in the business. And clearly there's a lot of great companies over the years. There's a lot of high flying tech names and a lot of other successful companies that have really done well. And you hear about those, but there are a lot of companies that didn't do that well. And you never really hear about the people who ended up on the wrong side of the story. So I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of survivorship bias out there for people who are successful and have made money via RSU, stock options, et cetera. But I really think it's important for people to understand what they own or where they are in their life and how is it appropriate for where they are and where they want to go.
Yeah, it is interesting. You're right. I think we all see that as something that is so desirable. And I could imagine that if you are receiving stock options or RSUs or whatever, that you would feel like, okay, there's my stock investment, and I can go, other money might go other places, but I can maybe limit you in some ways, at least from a thinking standpoint.
Can?
Yeah. So, okay, as a financial planner, what are some of your just philosophies around, what you do and how you do it?
Well, I think number one, saving money is actually a very, very easy a concept that a lot of people overlook. I think a lot of people are really chasing the next great investment idea. Fill in the blank, whatever you think that is, whether it's the next high-flying stock, it's a cryptocurrency, NFTs, whatever the case is. But I think a lot of people don't realize that if they actually save money and they save it in the right way and they put it away and they invest it in the proper accounts, that's so much more powerful than you're trying to make, whether it's 100%, 200% on a stock where people aren't really putting that much money to work. But if they do lose it, they're losing a substantial amount of money. And I think it would be best illustrated by a story, if that's okay for you and your listeners. Stories. Okay. So I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, one traffic light on the corner. And on this corner was a shoe store. And Mr. Klein ran the shoe store. He was very successful. His father had started the business before passing it to his son. And on the corner, it was one of those old tan brick buildings with big windows on the outside that would display the merchandise. So along the sidewalk, the windows are flush with the sidewalk. And then they sort of went into this funnel shape where they went into the door and you could see all of the items for sale, the shoes, the boots, the clothing. And upon walking in, it always smelled like leather. That smell always brings me back to going to Mr. Klein's store. And it was 1991. I was a kid. I was with my mom. I was always going there to get shoes because my feet were always growing. I needed new shoes, and running around all the time was rough on the equipment, so to speak. And my mom would always talk about Mr. Klein and how successful he was, and he was a really good businessman. And I always wanted to ask him about it, but I was always shy. I didn't really feel it was appropriate to ask him. And then Mom's like, yeah, ask him. Like he'll respond. Like he's a very nice man. So the one day I asked him about, you're very successful in business, Mr. Klein. What's one thing that you could share with me? And he said, worry about the pennies and the dollars will add up. And he was right, because the concept of compounding interest is very, very powerful. Yeah. And Albert Einstein actually said that compounding was the eighth wonder of the world. So if a great mind like Albert Einstein thought that was significant, clearly Mr. Klein did as well. And I never got the chance to talk to Albert Einstein, but I was pretty close when Mr. Klein gave me that advice a long time ago. So I opened a bank account the next day. And back then interest rates were actually pretty decent, and I would make a few cents every every month. But to try to put it into further perspective, just the idea of compounding, obviously, it's powerful. And if I were to give you 1 penny today, Michelle, and I were to double it every day for 30 days, at the end of 30 days, do you know how much that would be worth?
I knew you were going to ask me, and no, I don't.
Well, it would be worth $5.1 million at the end of 30 days. And It's pretty remarkable that starting with such a small amount and having it to increase to quite a bit by the end of 30 days is pretty remarkable. And it shows the power of compounding. And if you were to do the numbers and run it out in a spreadsheet, you could see that the first little bit's not that great, but the last 6 or 7 days is really substantial.
Wow. Okay, that is a much bigger number than I was expecting you to say. Now I just want to get off the podcast and go
don't
do
make
the math.
that deal with anyone if they ask you. If you're at a cocktail party, right?
And I do keep trying to talk to my kids, which they're not listening to me so much, but at a young age, I did make a lot of mistakes because in my 20s, I did kind of the the stuff that you were sort of expected to do, signed up for the 401k, put some minimal amount in, whatever. But I had some savings, but it was lost on me, I think, at that age, the crucial aspect of this compounding, feature to the whole thing. And so what can you say to younger people? I mean, I keep reiterating to my kids, it doesn't take very much. You can take $100 a month and put it away and, just automate it. And, you're going to be amazed at the end. So, what I do have a lot of parents, I always put it out there to people more my age or, 40s to 60s. and just ask them, what do you want to learn about money? And most of them immediately go to, well, my kids, I want them to know more. I want them to know, starting out, how to be better off, because they're in their 40s and 50s coming and talking to me about what to do, because they, not investment wise, but just in general, they know very little about money and money management. So,
well, the thing that you spoke about, having the auto enrollment to saving $100 a month, or perhaps even more, depending on the person's budget, is a great way to have money put away, because it's automatic. You don't really think about it. It just goes in every month, and that's it. And you look at the account, 2 or 3 years later, you're like, wow, like I saved all this money. Like, this is really good. So that's a really good thing to do, is to put away as much money as you can automatically, whether it's every pay cycle, every month, or even maybe more aggressive in terms of the cadence. But I think that's a great way to start. Secondly, you mentioned 401k. I would encourage everyone to put as much money as possible into their 401k. In fact, I'm a big believer of maxing it out, and hopefully you get a match of some sort from your employer.
Right.
So it could be substantial. It could be 15%, maybe even higher, depending on who your company is. But you're getting that money into the system, so to speak, and having it invested will just allow it more time to grow and to compound. And much like the penny example we spoke about, it's in there, and over time it will help you. And the best way to think about it is that if someone starts investing, whether it's 18, 19, 20, that if they wait until they're 30 and they start putting that same amount of money in, there's no way they could ever catch up as if they started earlier in their life. So get started early, save as much as possible, and try not to think about it, because it will be there, it'll grow. And when that person does move on later in life, they will have a substantial sum of money saved for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up savings. Thank you, because it's in today's world, it's not as glamorous as some of the other things out there. And I find that we're kind of going back to talking more about the fundamentals. And then, once you have your fundamentals met, then you can go a little crazier, I think. But for a lot of people, they sort of want to skip over the savings account and, even getting out of debt and things like that, and kind of jump ahead to whatever looks like the fastest, path to wealth. I don't know. I mean, you see more of it, so you can say whether, there are actually more opportunities in those quicker paths, seemingly quicker, than I'm seeing. But
yes, a lot of paths are seemingly quicker, and that's the shiny, flashy object that everyone's chasing, right? It's it's in the New York Times, it's in the Wall Street Journal, it's on Twitter, it's wherever. People are talking about this company, this investment. You have to get in. It's the next best thing. But in reality, people don't need to take on that risk. They don't need to take on that sort of speculation in some cases. The best way is to really save and have a greatly diversified portfolio, invested across industries, across geographies, that's appropriate for the person, as opposed to, putting that little bit of money, that almost like gambling, speculation. Just hope for it and see where it goes. Right. And go from there. And also along those lines, it also depends where the money is invested. And when I say where, the type of account that you have the money in. So there are three different sorts of accounts. There is your investment account, which is a taxable account. It's taxed at your income tax rate. There is, if you have a traditional 401k, it's a tax deferred account, which means the money you put in now is not taxed, but when you start taking it out in retirement, it's taxed. And then a tax-free account like a Roth IRA, the money you put in there, you've already paid taxes on. So any gains, any dividends, any sort of share sales where there's a gain, you're never ever taxed on the money ever again. So I think people having the right idea where they need to put their investments is really, really powerful.
Yeah, it's so interesting as you talk about all these things. In a way, it kind of makes your head spin. It almost paralyzes people, I think, because there's too many options, can't figure
There
out
are.
what to do. So, yeah. And so, for people who do feel that way, who are listening, going, this is all too much for me. I can't make up my mind. So is there a 1, 2, 3 kind of sequence of things that you would recommend, or does it not work that way?
A little bit. I would recommend a lot of people nowadays, because interest rates are actually somewhat substantial in the market, and people are putting money away, whether it's in a CD or something that's a steady paying interest on their money. That's a good thing if you want to get the return. But if that money's invested in a taxable account, depending on where you live, a lot of that could go to state, federal, local taxes. And I live in New York, so
Yeah.
roughly half of that's going to go to taxes. And you're on the West Coast in California, so I think it's a similar situation out there too. So even though someone's looking at, I get a 5% return on the CD, after tax is only 2.5%. So there's sort of that illusion, I'm making this money on my money, but then you need to pay the tax man at the end of the year. So things like that to consider as to where your money is invested and what's appropriate for you. And for some people, that could be the right strategy because they need that yield, they need that income for various purposes. So it depends on the person, their age or situation, but that's a rule that if you put it in that type of account, you're going to have to pay the tax on that.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm realizing that I wasn't even thinking about that the other day when I was looking at something, but that is an excellent point. Taxes always need to factor into all of this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when people work with you, I know, there are so many options and so many ways that people can get into investing these days. So talk to me a little about there's a clear advantage in terms of advice and strategy with working with a financial advisor. What about, the fees and the fact that people can just, go do this on their own through a lot of platforms and things that are known to be low fee. Can you I think that people are still very confused about how this all works.
Yes, people can go do it on their own, and that's fine. There are a lot of do-it-yourselfers, and people are more than welcome to do that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But when it comes to hiring someone, clearly there is a fee to pay that person to work with. And it's essentially, think of it as an outsourcing fee where maybe you're, just like when you hire your CPA or an attorney, that you're allowing an expert to take care of these finances for you. And a lot of what goes into that is that when working with this person, a financial planner, preferably a certified financial planner, a CFP certification, where they can help you with everything under the sun, not just investments, but everything in the financial picture, is that, as we indicated before, a CFP practitioner is an objective third party. And they will be a little bit distant and not as emotional as that person is with their situation, and will help them really understand, hopefully try to help them understand and make the right decision. Because I think really what it comes down to is that an advisor will help this person avoid the classic behavioral investment mistakes that many, many people do. Such as, buying at the top and then selling at the bottom and then repeating that over and over again and really losing a lot of money in the process.
Can you just stop there for 1 second? And because that's a really interesting concept. Can you explain how that happens? Because nobody really sets out to do that.
Right. I think what happens, as we indicated before, there's always like these shiny objects. People are chasing things, chasing returns. And when markets are high, whether it's over the 2021 or it was 2008 or the dot-com boom many, many years ago, there's just so much hype around what's happening. You're missing out. You need to get in. And people tend to get in then. And then unfortunately, markets go up and down, and then markets go down. People tend to sell because they feel like they've been burned. They got in at the wrong time. And then they'll probably stand on the sidelines. And this is very classic, unfortunately, this classic behavioral mistake. They'll sit in cash or a very, very minimal investment on a low return. And then when things are getting good again, they wait, and then they get in. Mm-hmm. And then they're in late again. And then the market goes down. And then they get mad because they feel like they got burned a second time. And it's very traumatic for a lot of people, unfortunately. And the best thing to do is to invest your money, and you need to move it around a little bit here and there as markets change. But the best advantage that anyone can do for themselves is to stay invested. And I just wanted to touch on a few more points about working with a financial planner. Is that a lot of working with a financial planner will save people time, will save people stress and worry around money, and help them avoid these essentially almost doom cycles that people go in, where they're getting in at the wrong time and getting out at the wrong time. And I really think that it's really helpful for these individuals, not just from an investing point of view, but having this money do what they want to do with their lives, and having it really align with their values. Maybe it's making work optional at some point, or leaving as much money as they want to their heirs. Or maybe they want to go have a vacation on the south of France and take some time off for work for a year or two, and then figure out what the next move is. But I really think trying to take a step back from what the money does and what it means is essentially what financial planning is.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said, and really makes a case for that, because we just operate from emotion. We make a lot of decisions, from emotional places. And it's really important to have somebody with us as a partner who's more objective and can see the bigger picture, in many areas, whether it's, changing careers or money. And so it really becomes a partnership, in life that is super helpful. And you do... I love what you're talking about with the values, because I think the younger financial planners, at least the ones that I've talked to on the show in particular, are more tuned into people's unique value systems. And, there's not just a formulaic way that we do this. There's, something that will accommodate you and something that will accommodate somebody else in their particular interests. And I really like that. I think in the old days, it was more like, well, you got to work for 40 years and you got to do this and you got to do that. And that's changed, I feel. And I think it's a good change. So, So it sounds like that's... you allow people to be who they want to be and work it out that way. And it's not just based on a number. We need to get to this number by this age.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think for people who debate starting to work with a financial advisor planner, it would be a wise thing to do. And doing all this money stuff alone, especially you were talking about the stock compensation, that's a mystery. You can do a lot of research yourself these days and learn a lot of things, but that somehow doesn't make up for having an actual partner to go through this with and talk it through. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Joe, any final words on investment or stock compensation or anything you want to throw out there for people to think about?
Well, there's a lot. I don't know if I could sum it up with one word, but obviously we touched upon that, money is a very emotional topic, and people's relationships with money depend on, how they grew up, where they grew up, what their parents were like, what their family was like. And there's all these different influences, and whether we're aware of it or not, a lot of these live in our subconscious, and they affect a lot of the decisions that people make with money. And I think when you work with someone who's a professional, that working with them can really help uncover these unhidden truths or values that people have around money, and helping them be aware of it is really important, and really gives them perspective on where they are now and where they want to continue and where they want to be on their money journey.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. Do you have your own kind of method of assessing that? Is there something that you do with clients that help them to understand themselves with money?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions I ask and we go through, certain points in their life or things that had happened. And a lot of times it may not come out in the first meeting or two, but over time with a relationship with someone, it comes up, it comes out just like a relationship with anyone.
Yeah.
It's there. And as long as I'm listening and I'm asking the right questions, I really get to hone in on things with them and really get to know them in a very personal and intimate way. And it's not just about the numbers, like you said, but really about what these values are and how they put them to use in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's great. And I love that too, when you talk to somebody about money and you start helping them to see that there are these unconscious beliefs and ideas that are driving their behavior. And then you're right, they don't necessarily, understand it so well in that initial conversation, but then they start thinking. And then all of a sudden, a month later, they're like, oh my gosh, this happened. And I realized that, this was what triggered it or whatever. So it's a very interesting thing. And once people start looking for it, they really start seeing it. So, yeah, well, Joe, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love that you have, both the general knowledge and also the more specific understanding of how to help people with their stock compensation. How do people get a hold of you and how can they, learn more?
Yeah, my website is fortrovepartners.com. That's FORTROVE partners.com. And if they want to email, my email is joe@fortrovepartners.com.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here today. I think this topic never gets old, so I love hearing new pieces of the puzzle around investing. And I hope people will get in touch with you. And thank you for helping people to move along this journey. So it can be complicated. So people need help. Yeah. Okay, and thank you, audience, for being here and listening to the Money and You Show. We love that you do that. So you can find us on all the podcast platforms and Roku, and thank you, ubngo.com, for broadcasting us. And you can also, if you're interested in setting up those foundational pieces of your financial life, I have a new program. It's not new. I'm doing it again. The Your Money Date program, or I take you on about 10 money dates as your chaperone to show you kind of how to connect with your money, learn about your money. And that's a sort of a kickoff to doing more things like investing. And so you can check that out. You can contact me. It's starting May 16th. You can contact me at Michelle, 2Ls, at limitfreelife.com. So thanks so much for being here. We would love for you to like or review the show and let us know what other topics you'd like to hear. So once again, we come to you Monday nights and then everywhere else right after that. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.